I simply asked where my $100,000 had gone. 3 seconds later, my stepmother slapped me, then used her fist. I was 29, yet beaten like a stranger. I thought I lost 100,000 until Grandpa showed me bank statements revealing $20 million transferred behind our backs. That day, I realized the blow was not about the missing cash, but to bury the $20 million heist she thought I would never uncover. My name is Lena Hartley, and I am 32 years old. Today, walking up the limestone steps of the Aurora County Courthouse in Denver felt less like entering a hall of justice and more like stepping into the center of a gladiatorial arena where the lions had been starved for a week. The Colorado sun was blinding, reflecting off the glass lenses of 50 different cameras, but the air was biting cold. It was the kind of cold that settles in your marrow and refuses to leave. Though I suspected the chill shaking my hands had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the people waiting inside. Reporters swarmed the entrance like vultures who had smelled blood from a mile away. They shouted my name, their voices overlapping into a cacophony of noise that threatened to drown out my own thoughts. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted the tearful breakdown of the prodigal daughter returning to destroy the family legacy. Or perhaps they wanted the rage of the woman scorned. They would get neither. I kept my chin high, my expression carved from the same granite as the Rocky Mountains visible in the distance. They did not understand. Today was not the day I would be judged. Today was the day the curtain would finally be ripped away from the stage, exposing the rot eating away at the foundation of the Hartley name. Today was the day my stepmother, Victoria Hartley, and my father, Richard Hartley, were finally dragged into the harsh, unforgiving light. I pushed through the heavy oak doors, leaving the chaotic noise of the press behind, only to find a different kind of heaviness waiting for me in the hallway. The air inside smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent that usually brought order to mind, but today it smelled like anxiety. To the outside world, my family was royalty. Hartley Ridge Developments was not just a company, it was a Denver institution. If you drove through the high-end neighborhoods or vacationed in the luxury ski resorts dotted along the Rocky Mountain Range, you saw our name. We owned apartment complexes that housed thousands, commercial centers that drove the local economy, and retreats where senators and CEOs shook hands over single malt scotch. The family trust was valued in the tens of millions of dollars. It was an empire built on bricks, mortar, and the unspoken rule that appearance was everything. That appearance was currently sitting at the defense table. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm against the floor. I forced myself to look at them. Victoria sat closest to the aisle. If you did not know her, if you had only seen her in the society pages or at the charity galas she organized for women and community, you would think she was the victim here. She was impeccable. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a chignon so tight it looked painful, not a single strand out of place. She wore a navy suit that whispered old money, conservative, expensive, and designed to garner sympathy. She looked like the perfect mother, the grieving matriarch trying to hold her fractured family together. But I knew better. I knew the predator living behind those carefully applied layers of makeup. I knew the way her eyes, currently cast downward in a performance of sorrow, could turn into shards of ice the moment she felt her control slipping. She was the architect of this entire nightmare, a woman who treated people like chess pieces and laws like suggestions. Next to her was my father, Richard. Seeing him made a lump of bile rise in my throat. He was a man who commanded respect in boardrooms across the state. He was the face of Hartley Ridge Developments, the handshake that closed the deals. Yet, here he sat, slumped slightly in his chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was the silent partner in his own marriage, the man who stood behind Victoria's shoulder and nodded, the man who signed every check and every fraudulent document simply because it was easier than fighting her. His silence had been the weapon that allowed her to bleed us dry. He did not look at me. He stared at his hands, those same hands that had signed away my grandfather's legacy, and I wondered if he felt any shame or if he was just terrified of the consequences. And then there was Ethan, My half-brother sat on the far side of Richard, looking for all the world like he was waiting for a bus rather than facing federal charges. At 35 years old, Ethan was Victoria's golden boy. The prince promised the kingdom. He was slouched in his chair, his expensive suit rumpled just enough to look trendy, scrolling through his phone with an expression of utter boredom. He checked his watch, sighed, and shifted his weight, broadcasting to the entire room that this trial was nothing more than a nuisance interrupting his schedule. He had never worked a real day in his life, and yet he had spent money I had earned. He had driven cars bought with funds stolen from my grandfather. His arrogance was a physical thing, a force field that he believed would protect him from anything as mundane as consequences. I reached the prosecution table and took my seat. The chair was hard, grounding me. "Are you ready?" The voice was low, calm, and sharp as a scalpel. I turned to look at Talia Monroe. She was an imposing figure even while sitting down, as a prosecutor for the High Plains Area Federal Prosecutor's Office. Talia had a reputation that made defense attorneys break out in hives. She did not look at me with pity. From the moment I had walked into her office with a box of stolen bank records and a terrifying story, she had looked at me like a soldier looks at a comrade in the trenches. She wore a charcoal suit, her dark hair cut in a sharp bob, and her eyes were constantly scanning the room, assessing threats. "They are going to play dirty, Lena," Talia whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "They are going to try to break you before you even say your name for the record. They have nothing left but character assassination, and they will use every round of ammunition they have." I looked at her, and for the first time that morning, my hands stopped trembling. I thought about the bruises that had faded from my skin 3 years ago but never left my memory. I thought about the way the kitchen floor felt against my cheek. "I have been ready," I whispered back, my voice steady. "I have been ready since the day my stepmother punched me in the face over $100,000. Talia gave a single, curt nod. It was all the acknowledgement I needed. We both knew what was coming. For weeks, the Hartley family lawyers had been leaking stories to the press. I had read the headlines. They painted a picture of Lena Hartley that was almost unrecognizable. They called me greedy. They called me unstable. They claimed I was a failed analyst who had come crawling back home demanding money I had not earned. They spun a narrative that I was manipulating the memory of a senile grandfather to extort the parents who had lovingly raised me. It was a masterpiece of fiction, designed to taint the jury pool before the first piece of evidence was entered. I glanced over at the defense table again. Victoria was doing something that made my stomach turn. She reached out and took Richard's hand, squeezing it visibly. She leaned her head toward him, whispering something that looked comforting, playing the role of the supportive wife to perfection. It was a performance for the jury members who were filing into the box. Their lawyer, Gregory Dale, caught my eye. He was a man who charged $600 an hour to make problems disappear. He flashed a smile that did not reach his eyes, a smirk that said he had already won. He looked at me like I was a bug he was about to crush under the heel of his Italian loafer. He exuded confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you have buried the truth so deep that no one should be able to find it. He tapped his pen against a thick file on his desk, signaling that he had plenty of dirt on me ready to deploy. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom, cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Harper walked in. The atmosphere in the room instantly compressed, the air growing heavy and dense. Judge Harper was a woman in her 60s with a reputation for zero tolerance for theatrics. She moved with purpose, her black robes flowing around her, and took her seat at the high bench. She adjusted her glasses and looked out over the courtroom, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the defense table before sweeping over to us. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. It was a chaotic rhythm, loud enough that I feared the stenographer might hear it. This was it. There was no turning back. The bridges had been burned, the ships had been scuttled, and we were standing on the precipice of war. Judge Harper banged her gavel. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Court is now in session," she declared. As the noise of the gavel faded, the room seemed to hold its breath. I looked straight ahead, focusing on the wood grain of the witness stand where I would soon be sitting. The world saw a family feud. They saw a daughter suing her father. They saw a tragedy of wealth, but they did not know the truth. Not yet. To understand why we were here today, surrounded by federal marshals and facing 20 years of prison time, you could not just look at the indictments. You could not just look at the forensic accounting spreadsheets or the forged signatures. Those were just the debris left in the wake of the explosion. To understand this, I told myself, looking inwardly at the audience of ghosts that had followed me here, you have to go back. You have to go back 3 years. You have to go back to a quiet morning in a kitchen that smelled of citrus and coffee. You have to go back to the moment I made the mistake of asking a simple question. I had asked about $100,000. I had thought it was a lot of money. I had thought it was my money. I had no idea that pulling on that one loose thread would unravel the entire tapestry of lies my family had woven around us. I had no idea that asking about $100,000 would be the catalyst that exposed a $20 million secret they were willing to destroy me to keep. The prosecutor stood up. Talia adjusted her jacket. "Your Honor," Talia began, her voice ringing clear and true. The story was about to be told. The world was about to see the Hartleys naked, stripped of their money and their pretenses. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of anxiety and old wood, and let the memory take over. I closed my eyes for a second and let the courtroom fade away. When I opened them, I was ready to drag them all down with me. 3 years ago, life felt like an equation I had finally balanced. I was 29 years old, working as a senior risk analyst at Northbridge Quant Labs, a boutique financial firm in downtown Denver. I took pride in the sharp lines of my suits, the steady rhythm of my keyboard, and most importantly, the independence I had carved out of the rocky soil of my family history. I lived in a modest apartment that I paid for. I drove a car that was in my name and in my savings account. I had reached a milestone that felt like a fortress wall between me and the chaos of the Hartley family. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp, bright Colorado morning that usually made me feel invincible. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, opening my laptop to perform my daily ritual. I logged into my Aurora Ridge online banking portal. It was a habit born of paranoia, perhaps, or maybe just the discipline of a woman who works with numbers for a living. I liked seeing the number, $100,000. It had taken me 5 years of bonuses, skipped vacations, and frugal living to reach that 6-figure mark. It was not just currency. It was my go fund. It was my safety net. It was the proof that I did not need my father, Richard, or his terrifyingly perfect wife, Victoria, to survive. The page loaded. The blue progress bar crawled across the top of the screen, and then the dashboard appeared. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, certain that the Wi-Fi had glitched or the page had failed to render the cascading style sheets correctly. The balance read $242.15. The coffee in my stomach turned to battery acid. I stared at the screen, my breath hitching in my throat. The number $100,000 was gone. It had simply evaporated. My hands began to shake, a tremor starting in my fingers and working its way up to my shoulders. I clicked on the transaction history, my mouse cursor jittering across the glass trackpad. There it was, a single line item dated yesterday afternoon. Transfer to external account, Vista Legacy Consulting, LLC, amount $100,000. I stared at the name, Vista Legacy Consulting LLC. It sounded generic, the kind of shell company name you see in the footnotes of a boring quarterly report. But then my eyes slid to the detail column, where the receiving bank's registered address was listed in small gray font. 1080 High Ridge Lane, Suite B. My heart stopped. That was not a business park. That was not a downtown office. That was the address of the carriage house behind my father's estate. It was the registered address for the family's private office, the nerve center where Victoria managed the philanthropic arm of the Hartley empire. Someone had reached into my personal account, an account that bore only my name, and siphoned every cent I owned directly into a corporate entity controlled by my stepmother. I stood up so fast my chair clattered to the floor. This had to be a mistake. It had to be a banking error, a crossed wire, a glitch in the clearinghouse system. But deep down, in the part of my brain that analyzed risk for a living, I knew there were no glitches that specific. This was a targeted extraction. I printed the statement. The printer whirred and spat out the paper, the warm sheet feeling heavy in my hand. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door. I did not call. I did not text. I needed to see their faces. I needed to hear them tell me this was a misunderstanding. As I drove the 40 minutes from my apartment to the sprawling gated community where the Hartleys lived, I tried to construct a rational explanation. Maybe the bank thought it was fraud and moved it to a safe account associated with my last name. Maybe my father had seen an investment opportunity and acted impulsively, forgetting to ask. I was lying to myself. I knew it. But the alternative was too terrifying to admit while navigating the interstate at 80 miles per hour. When I pulled into the circular driveway of the Hartley estate, the house looked as imposing as ever. It was a sprawling mansion of stone and timber, designed to look rustic, but costing more than a small town's annual budget. I used my old key to open the front door. The air inside was cool and smelled of lemon verbena and expensive furniture polish. I walked straight to the kitchen. It was a cavernous space with double islands, professional-grade appliances, and a wall of windows looking out over the manicured gardens. It was the picture of domestic tranquility. Victoria stood at the main island, slicing a dragon fruit with a small, sharp paring knife. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and pearls, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. My father, Richard, sat at the breakfast nook, scrolling through emails on his tablet with a cup of tea steaming beside him. My half-brother, Ethan, lay sprawled on the oversized leather sofa in the adjacent family room, mashing buttons on a video game controller, his legs thrown over the armrest. It was so normal. It was so peaceful. It made me want to scream. Victoria looked up as I entered, her smile tight and practiced. "Lena," she said, her voice smooth. "We were not expecting you. Did you forget something?" I walked up to the island and slapped the folded bank statement down on the granite countertop. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot, but Ethan did not even look up from his game. "Where is my money?" I asked. My voice was trembling, but I forced it to be loud. "Where is my $100,000? And who authorized a transfer to Vista Legacy?" My father looked up from his tablet, blinking slowly behind his reading glasses. He looked confused, or maybe he was just acting. Victoria, however, did not flinch. She carefully placed a slice of white and black speckled fruit onto a porcelain plate. She wiped the knife on a linen napkin before looking at the paper. She glanced at it for barely a second before looking back at me with an expression of pity. "Oh, that," she said, as if I had asked about a missing Tupperware container. "You are mistaken, Lena. That is not your money." "Excuse me?" I felt the blood rushing to my ears. "That is my savings account. It is my salary, my bonuses. I have been saving that for 5 years." "It is family money," Victoria corrected me, her tone hardening just a fraction. "We supported you through college. We helped you with your first car. We decided that it was time to recall those loans. The family has cash flow needs right now, and since you are doing so well at that little data job of yours, we knew you would want to contribute. We simply corrected the ledger." I stared at her, my mouth slightly open. "Loans? I went to state school on a partial scholarship and worked 2 jobs. I paid for my own car. There were never any loans, and even if there were, you cannot just log into my bank account and take $100,000 without my permission. That is theft. Victoria, that is grand larceny." "Watch your tone," she snapped. The mask of the perfect hostess slipped, revealing the steel beneath. "Do not come into my house and throw around legal terms you do not understand." "I understand perfectly," I shouted. I looked at my father. "Dad, are you hearing this? She stole $100,000 from me. Tell her to send it back, Right now." Richard shifted in his seat. He looked at the paper on the counter, then at Victoria, then out the window. He looked anywhere but at me. "Lena," he said, his voice weak and raspy. "Vic says it is for the business. We are all making sacrifices. You should be grateful you are in a position to help the family." "Help? This isn't help. This is robbery." I turned back to Victoria, who had picked up the knife again. "I did not sign anything. I did not authorize this. My name is the only name on that account. If that money is not back in my account by the end of the business day, I am going to the police, and I am going to the bank fraud division." The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the faint beeping of Ethan's video game in the other room. Victoria set the knife down very slowly. She walked around the island. Her heels clicked on the travertine floor. She stopped right in front of me. She was a few inches shorter than I was, but in that moment, she loomed like a giant. "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed. "After everything we have done for you, you think you are so special with your little apartment and your little savings? Who do you think gave you the connections to get that job? Who do you think you are to threaten us in our own home?" "I am not threatening you," I said, standing my ground, though my knees were shaking. "I am telling you that you cannot steal my money." "It is not your money," she screamed. And then she moved. It was so fast I did not see it coming. She brought her hand back and slapped me across the face. It was not a theatrical slap. It was a blow delivered with the full force of her body. Her palm connected with my cheekbone with a sickening crack. My head snapped to the side. My vision went white for a second, and the taste of copper filled my mouth where my teeth had cut into the inside of my cheek. I stumbled back, clutching my face, shock overriding the pain. I was 29 years old. I was a professional woman. I had not been hit since I was a child, and never by her. "Victoria," I gasped, staring at her. She did not stop. Seeing me stagger seemed to trigger something feral in her. She lunged forward, grabbing the fabric of my blouse. She shoved me backward. My lower back collided hard with the edge of the cabinetry. The pain was sharp and immediate, radiating up my spine. "You come in here and stress your father?" She punched me. It was a closed fist, aimed clumsily but effectively at my shoulder and ribs. "You upset this family over numbers on a screen?" I tried to push her away, but she was fueled by a manic rage. She shoved me again, pinning me against the counter. Her face was inches from mine, her eyes wide and terrifyingly devoid of humanity. "This is my house," she spat, her spittle landing on my cheek. "I decide where the money goes. I decide who gets what. You are nothing. You are just a leech we have tolerated for Richard's sake." She grabbed my chin, digging her nails into my skin, forcing me to look at her. "Listen to me, Lena. If you open your mouth to anyone, the bank, the police, your little friends, about this $100,000, you will regret it. I will bury you. You will lose your job. You will lose your reputation. You will lose a lot more than $100,000. Do you understand me?" I was gasping for air, tears streaming down my face, my side throbbing where she had struck me. I looked past her shoulder, desperate for salvation. "Dad!" I cried out. "Dad, please!" My father stood up. He took one step toward us. His hand came up, hovering in the air. "Vic," he said. "Vic, that is enough." Victoria froze. She looked at him, challenging him with her glare. Then she looked back at me with a sneer of disgust and released me, shoving me one last time for good measure. I slumped against the cabinets, holding my ribs. I looked at my father, waiting for him to yell, waiting for him to tell her to get out, waiting for him to check if I was bleeding. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pathetic, watery sorrow. Then, he slowly sat back down at the table. He picked up his tea. His hand was shaking, but he took a sip. He turned his face toward the window, refusing to meet my gaze. He was not going to help me. He was terrified of her, or worse, he was complicit. The realization hurt more than the slap. It hurt more than the missing money. It broke something fundamental inside my chest. "Get out," Victoria said, turning her back on me and returning to her fruit as if she had just swatted a fly. "And do not come back until you have learned some respect." I grabbed the crumpled bank statement from the counter. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I did not say another word. There were no words left for people like this. I walked out of the kitchen, past Ethan, who paused his game for 1 second to look at me with a mixture of amusement and boredom, before putting his headphones back on. I ran to my car. I locked the doors. My hands fumbled with the ignition, but I did not start the engine immediately. I sat there in the driveway, surrounded by the perfectly manicured hedges and the silence of wealth. I pulled down the visor mirror. My cheek was already turning a mottled red. My lip was slightly swollen. I lifted my shirt and saw the red mark forming on my ribs where she had punched me. I cried. I cried the kind of ugly, heaving sobs that come from a place of utter helplessness. I mourned the money. Yes, $100,000 was my freedom, and it was gone. But mostly, I mourned the father I had just lost. After 5 minutes, the tears stopped. A cold clarity took their place. I took my phone out of my purse. I snapped a photo of my face in the mirror. Then I pulled up my shirt and took a photo of my ribs. Finally, I smoothed out the crumpled bank statement on the passenger seat and took a high-resolution photo of the transaction details, ensuring the address of Vista Legacy was clearly visible. They thought this was over. They thought a slap and a threat would silence me. They thought I was still the little girl who was afraid of upsetting the balance. I wiped the blood from the inside of my lip with the back of my hand. I started the car. "You want to talk about losing more than 100,000? I whispered to the empty car. "Fine, let us see what else you have to lose." I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, leaving the Hartley estate behind. I was bruised, I was broke, and I was alone. But as I turned onto the main road, I knew one thing for certain. I was not going to let this drown me. I was going to find out why they were so desperate for my money that they would beat me for it. And I was going to make them pay for every single cent. Whatever secret they were hiding behind that transaction, I was going to find it, even if I had to burn their precious legacy to the ground to do it. The silence in my apartment after the incident was deafening. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a war room before the first strike. I had the photos of my bruises. I had the bank statement, but I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that these were just pieces of paper against an empire. I needed an ally. I needed someone who knew where the bodies were buried because he was the one who had refused to dig the graves. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in over 6 months. Arthur Hartley, my grandfather. He was the patriarch who had built the foundation of the family wealth. Not through shell companies and manipulation, but through grit and timber and concrete. He had stepped away from the daily operations of Hartley Ridge Developments 10 years ago, disgusted by what he called the glossy rot of modern real estate. He lived in Spring Hollow, a small mountain town 3 hours west of Denver, in a cabin that cost less than Victoria's shoe collection. The phone rang 4 times. "Hartley." His voice rasped. It sounded like grinding stones. "Grandpa," I said. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the tremor was there, a ghost of the violence I had just experienced. "It is Lena." There was a pause on the line. Arthur had an uncanny ability to hear things that were not said. "You sound like you are standing on a ledge. Lena," he said. "What happened?" "I need to see you," I said, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I found something. Money is missing from my account. And Victoria, she hit me." The line went dead silent for 5 long seconds. "Come up," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its rasp and becoming pure steel. "Come up this weekend. Do not tell anyone where you are going. Money matters in this family are never just small matters." I drove to Spring Hollow on Saturday morning. The drive took me up into the Rockies, the air thinning and cooling as I ascended. By the time I pulled my sedan up the gravel driveway of Arthur's cabin, The pristine, manicured oppression of Denver felt like a different planet. Arthur was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a heavy wool cardigan, leaning on a cane he claimed he only used for hiking but now seemed to need for standing. He looked older than I remembered. His skin was like parchment, and his eyes, usually sharp and bright blue, looked tired. But as I stepped out of the car, those eyes locked onto the fading bruise on my cheekbone. I walked up the steps. He did not hug me. The Hartleys were not huggers. Instead, he reached out a trembling hand and tilted my chin up, examining the mark Victoria had left. "She used a closed fist?" he asked quietly. "Open hand first," I said, "then a fist to the ribs." Arthur made a sound in his throat, a growl of disgust. He turned and opened the heavy wooden door. "Get inside. We have work to do." The cabin smelled of pine wood smoke and old books. It was cluttered but clean, filled with the artifacts of a life lived before digital banking and shell corporations. We sat at his heavy oak dining table. I laid it all out, the statement showing the withdrawal of $100,000, the transfer to Vista Legacy Consulting, the photo of the office address. Arthur looked at the papers, but he did not seem surprised. That was what scared me. He pushed the papers aside as if they were merely the appetizer to a much more poisonous main course. "You think you are here because you lost $100,000? Arthur said. It was not a question. "It is my life savings, Grandpa," I said. "Of course that is why I'm here." "No," he said. He stood up, groaning slightly with the effort, and walked over to a painting of a stag that hung above the fireplace. He reached behind the frame and triggered a latch. The painting swung forward, revealing a wall safe. It was an old mechanical model, not the digital ones my father used. He spun the dial. Left, right, left. The tumblers clicked loudly in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and brought it to the table. He slid it across the wood until it rested under my hands. The logo on the top left corner was embossed in gold. Evercrest Private Banking. "Open it," he commanded. I undid the string tie and pulled out a stack of documents. The first page was a statement of assets. My eyes scanned the lines, expecting to see Arthur's pension or his personal savings. Instead, I saw a trust name I had never heard before. Hartley Future Trust. I looked at the line below it. Primary beneficiary, Lena Hartley. I frowned, confused. "What is this?" "Keep reading," Arthur said. "Look at the balance." My eyes drifted to the bottom right corner. I blinked. I brought the paper closer to my face. Total assets, $20 million. The air left my lungs. I looked up at him, my mouth opening and closing without sound. "$20 million?" I whispered. "Grandpa, what is this?" "I set it up 5 years ago," Arthur said, sinking back into his chair. He looked exhausted. When I stepped down, I knew what Victoria was. I knew Richard was too weak to stop her. They were already talking about restructuring the assets for tax efficiency. That is their favorite phrase. Tax efficiency. It is code for hiding money. He pointed a gnarled finger at the document. "I liquidated my personal shares in the commercial district holdings. I put the cash into this trust. It is irrevocable, or it was supposed to be. The terms state that only you can access it, and only upon my death, or when you turn 30, no one else. Not Richard, not Victoria, not Ethan." "I never knew," I said, staring at the staggering number. $20 million. It was enough to change a life. It was enough to end a life. "I did not want you to know until it was safe," Arthur said. "But I made a mistake. I kept the records in the family office archives for safekeeping, thinking they were secure in the master vault. I underestimated her." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. 3 weeks ago, an old friend of mine who still works in compliance at the main office called me. He told me that a modification document had been filed with the bank. He said the paperwork claimed to change the beneficiary of the Hartley Future Trust. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "Change it to who?" "Not a who," Arthur said. "A what? A company called Vista Legacy Consulting." I looked down at my own bank statement, the one with the missing $100,000. The name was the same. They are moving the 20 million, I realized, the horror dawning on me. They are stealing the trust. They have likely already moved it, Arthur corrected me. My friend said the modification paperwork had a signature that looked like mine, but I have not signed anything in 2 years. Lena, my hands shake too much to sign a check, let alone a complex trust amendment. They forged it. He reached out and tapped the bruise on my hand. That is why she hit you, he said. His voice was low and grave. Do you understand now? You went there asking about $100,000 to Victoria. That was an audit. That was a test. If you made a scene, if you fought back over 100,000, she would know you would eventually find the 20 million. But if she could beat you down, if she could scare you into silence over the small amount, she would know she was safe to steal the fortune. I stared at him. The realization hit me harder than Victoria's fist ever could. The slap, the punch to the ribs, the threat that I would lose more than money. She wasn't talking about my job. She was talking about this. She was talking about an inheritance that would grant me total independence from her control. The blow for 100,000 was not because of that amount, Arthur said, echoing my thoughts. It was a practice run. It was a stress test to see if you would break. They needed to know if you would stay silent when they took the 20 million. I felt a wave of nausea. They are criminals. Grandpa, this is prison-level fraud. Yes, Arthur said, and they are banking on the fact that I am an old man dying in the mountains, and you are a young woman with no resources. They think they have won. He pushed the folder firmly toward me. Take this, make copies, hide them, do not keep them in your apartment, do not keep them in your car, and listen to me, Lena, you are going to have to fight them. I am too old, and I am too tired. But you have the fire. I saw it in your eyes when you were 6 years old, and I see it now. I drove back to Denver that evening with the file tucked under the spare tire in my trunk. I was terrified. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror looked like a threat. I felt like I was carrying a nuclear warhead, but alongside the fear, there was a new, cold anger. They had beaten me for asking for crumbs while they were stealing the entire bakery. I wanted justice, but the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 3 weeks after my visit, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. It was a nurse from St. Jude's Hospital. Arthur had suffered a stroke. I rushed to the hospital, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I arrived at the intensive care unit, I was stopped at the nurse's station. I am his granddaughter, I told the head nurse, desperate to get through the double doors. Lena Hartley. The nurse looked down at her clipboard, her expression sympathetic but firm. I am sorry, Ms. Hartley. We have strict instructions from the medical proxy. No visitors except immediate family approved by the proxy holder. I am immediate family, I argued. The list is restricted to Richard Hartley, Victoria Hartley, and Ethan Hartley, she said. I looked past her. Through the glass window of the waiting area, I saw them. Victoria was sitting on a couch, looking impeccably dressed in black, reading a magazine. Richard was standing by the window, talking on his cell phone, and standing next to Victoria was not a doctor, but Gregory Dale, the family's shark of a lawyer. They were not there to comfort a dying man. They were there to secure the perimeter. They were there to make sure Arthur did not say a word to me or anyone else before he died. I banged on the glass. Victoria looked up. She saw me. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply looked at the nurse and gave a small shake of her head. Security escorted me out 10 minutes later. I never saw Arthur again. He died 2 months later. The official cause was complications from the stroke. I found out through a press release issued by Hartley Ridge Developments. There was no personal call, no text, just a public statement about the loss of a pioneer. The reading of the will took place at the offices of Hawthorne and Keene, a prestigious firm in a glass tower downtown. I went because I had to know. I had to see how far they would go. The conference room was cold, the air conditioning set to a temperature that discouraged lingering. Richard sat at the head of the table, looking more diminished than ever. Victoria sat to his right, her face a mask of polite grief. Ethan was there, looking at his watch, clearly eager to get back to whatever expensive hobby he was currently funding. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Keene with silver hair and a voice like oiled velvet, read the document. It was a standard will. Dated, I noted with a surge of fury, only 4 months ago. To my beloved son, Richard, I leave the entirety of my shares in Hartley Ridge Developments. To my grandson, Ethan, I leave the mountain estate and the collection of vintage automobiles. I waited for my name. I waited for the mention of the trust. I waited for the $20 million that Arthur had shown me with his own hands. Mr. Keene flipped the page. He looked up. And that concludes the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Hartley. The room was silent. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap. "Excuse me," I said. My voice sounded loud in the quiet room. "Is there no mention of the Hartley Future Trust?" Mr. Keene looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He looked at Victoria. A micro-expression passed between them. A flicker of recognition. A shared secret. "I am afraid I do not know what you are referring to, Ms. Hartley." Mr. Keene said smoothly, "All of Mr. Hartley's assets were consolidated into the estate prior to his passing. There are no separate trusts listed in the schedule of assets." "That is a lie," I said, standing up. "I saw the papers. I saw the Evercrest statements. There was $20 million. Victoria sighed. It was a long, weary sound, designed to make me look like a hysterical child. "Lena," she said softly, "we know you are grieving. We know you had expectations, but Arthur was very sick at the end. He was confused. He often imagined things that were not there. There is no trust. There never was." "He showed it to me," I shouted. "He showed me the fraud. He told me you forced him to change it." "This is exactly why we did not want her here," Ethan muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She is obsessed with money." "We are done here," Victoria said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "Mr. Keene, thank you for your services. Lena, if you continue to make these baseless accusations, we will have to take legal measures to protect the family reputation. You have caused enough trouble." They walked out. They walked out with everything: my grandfather's legacy, my inheritance, the truth. I stood alone in the cold conference room. I looked at the empty chair where my father had sat. He had not looked at me once. It was as if the trust had never existed. They had erased it. They had erased Arthur's intent. They had erased my future. But as I walked out of that office, fighting back tears of rage, I remembered Arthur's words. It was a practice run. They thought they had won, because they had silenced the old man and scared the young woman, but they had made a fatal error. They had shown me exactly who they were. They had shown me that there was no line they would not cross. And they had forgotten one thing. I still had the copies Arthur gave me. They were hidden, safe, and waiting. I was not going to let them get away with $20 million. I was going to become the nightmare they never saw coming. The mourning period was over. The investigation was about to begin. 3 years is a long time to hold your breath. For 1,095 days, I had lived in a self-imposed exile, barricaded inside a 600-square-foot apartment in downtown Denver. I had cut the cord. I had stopped showing up to the holiday dinners I was not invited to anyway. I had stopped checking the society pages to see what charity gala Victoria was chairing. I buried myself in my work at Northbridge Quant Labs, letting the cold, hard logic of risk analysis numb the part of my brain that still screamed about the injustice of it all. I told myself I had moved on. I told myself that the copy of Arthur's bank files, hidden inside the lining of a winter coat in my closet, was just a souvenir of a life I had left behind. I was lying to myself. The past has a way of sliding under your door when you least expect it. Literally. It was a Tuesday evening, raining the kind of gray, slushy rain that turns Denver into a mud pit. I came home tired, my eyes stinging from staring at spreadsheets for 10 hours. There was a manila envelope sitting on my welcome mat. No stamp, no return address, just my name, written in block letters with a thick black marker. I carried it inside, my heart doing that familiar, panicked flutter it had developed 3 years ago. I locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and sat at my small kitchen table. I used a steak knife to slit the top open. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. They were photocopies, slightly grainy, as if they had been hurried through a machine while someone watched the door. The first page was a copy of the minutes from an internal board meeting of Hartley Ridge Developments, dated 2 months after Arthur died. My eyes scanned the corporate speak until they hit a paragraph circled in red ink. Motion to reallocate liquid assets from the Evercrest holding account to internal management. Transfer of $20 million authorized to Vista Legacy Consulting LLC for administrative purposes. Note: beneficiary notification protocol suspended per executive order. My breath hitched. Vista Legacy Consulting. The name was like a trigger being pulled in my memory. That was it. That was the same name I had seen on my bank statement 3 years ago. That was the entity that had swallowed my $100,000. The connection was absolute. The same shell company that had stolen my life savings was the vehicle used to drain my grandfather's trust. I flipped to the second page. It was a screenshot of an email. The sender was Marianne Cole, the family's longtime chief financial officer. The recipient was Victoria Hartley. Subject: concerns regarding compliance. Victoria: I am reviewing the transfer documents for the Evercrest liquidation. I feel uncomfortable proceeding. The signature on the amendment form for Arthur does not match the samples we have on file from before his stroke. We really should paused. The email cut off there. It had not been sent, or perhaps it had been deleted mid-draft. Someone had accessed the drafts folder or taken a screen capture before it could be scrubbed. The note at the bottom, scrawled in that same frantic handwriting, read, "She knows. Do not stop digging." I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain hit the window. For 3 years, I had thought my $100,000 was just a petty theft, a punishment for being the unloved stepchild. But looking at these papers, the geometry of the crime shifted. The $100,000 was not a punishment. It was a test transaction. It was a liquidity test to see if the pipeline to Vista Legacy worked before they poured $20 million of stolen trust money into it. I stood up and went to the closet. I slashed open the lining of my old coat and pulled out the file Arthur had given me. I taped the new documents to my living room wall. Then I dragged a whiteboard out from my home office area. I began to draw. I drew a box for Arthur Hartley. I drew a line to Hartley Future Trust. I drew a line to Evercrest Private Banking. Then, in red marker, I drew the intersection, Vista Legacy Consulting LLC. From Vista, I started adding the names of the smaller LLCs I had found while digging through public records over the years. Companies registered to strip malls and P.O. boxes, all listing Ethan or Victoria as officers. The money flowed like water, starting as a roar in Arthur's account and trickling down into streams that fed my family's lifestyle. The chart on my wall looked like a conspiracy theory, but the math was sound. The math never lied. People lied. Signatures lied. But $20 million did not just vanish without leaving a wake. I needed to verify the source. The next morning, I called in sick to Northbridge. I put on my most expensive suit, the one I saved for board presentations, and walked into the downtown branch of Evercrest Private Banking. The lobby smelled of money, that specific mix of espresso, leather, and silence. I asked to see the branch manager. I was led into a glass-walled office where a man I did not recognize sat behind a mahogany desk. He was young, polished, and had the dead eyes of a bureaucrat. "Ms. Hartley," he said, not offering me a seat. "How can I help you?" "I am here regarding the Hartley Future Trust," I said, placing Arthur's original statement on his desk. "I am the beneficiary. I need to see the transaction history for the last 3 years." The manager did not even look at the paper. He picked it up and handed it back to me with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "That trust was closed 3 years ago, Ms. Hartley," he said smoothly. The assets were transferred according to the instructions of the grantor. The grantor was my grandfather, and he told me he never authorized a transfer, I said, my voice rising. I have evidence that the signature was forged. I have evidence the money went to a shell company controlled by my stepmother. The manager's face went blank. We take client privacy very seriously. As you are not a current account holder, and you are not listed on the final disposition documents, I cannot discuss this with you. If you refuse to leave, I will call security. You are covering up a crime, I snapped. I am following protocol, he replied. Good day, Ms. Hartley. I walked out of the bank, shaking with rage. They had walled me out. They had scrubbed my name from the system so thoroughly that I did not exist. But as I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my purse, I remembered something else Arthur had mentioned. He had told me about an employee who warned him. I went back to my apartment and scoured the old files again. In the margins of a handwritten note from Arthur, I found a name scribbled in blue ink. Nolan Price, good kid, left after ethical dispute. I fired up my laptop. I searched for Nolan Price on LinkedIn. Nothing recent. I searched Facebook. Nothing. I switched to a deeper search, looking for public records in Denver. I found a Nolan Price listed as an employee for a bar called the Rusty Anchor in the Lodoo district. It was a long shot. A private banker turning into a bartender was a steep fall. But if he had left Evercrest because of ethics, maybe the fall was the point. That night, I walked into the Rusty Anchor. It was a dive, the kind of place with sticky floors and neon signs that buzzed too loudly. There was one bartender working the tap. He looked to be about 30, with tired eyes and sleeves rolled up to show faded tattoos. But he had the hands of someone who used to wear cufflinks, clean, precise movements as he poured a stout. I sat at the bar. Nolan Price? He froze for a fraction of a second. He looked up, his eyes scanning my face, then my suit. He wiped the counter with a rag. Who is asking? Lena Hartley, I said. Arthur Hartley's granddaughter. The rag stopped moving. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of recognition. Then he sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. I wondered if you would ever show up, he said quietly. You look like him. I need to talk to you, I said, about the trust, about Vista Legacy. I do not talk about that, he said, turning his back to grab a bottle. I signed an NDA that is thicker than a Bible. I like not being sued, lady. They stole $20 million. Nolan, I said to his back, and they beat me up for asking about 100,000. He turned around slowly. What? I pulled up the sleeve of my jacket. The bruise was long gone, but I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo I had taken in the car 3 years ago. The purple and black mark on my cheek, the red welt on my ribs. My stepmother did that, I said, my voice steady. She did that because I asked where my savings went. She told me if I asked about the money again, I would lose more than just cash. She was protecting the 20 million. You know she was. Nolan stared at the photo. He looked at the patrons in the bar, then leaned over the counter, lowering his voice. I was there, he whispered. The day they brought the paperwork in, Victoria and that lawyer, Dale, they came into the manager's office. They had the amendment document, the signature. It looked shaky, wrong. I told my boss. Arthur Hartley does not sign like that. My boss told me to shut up and process the wire. You saw it, I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. You are a witness. I am a nobody, Nolan said bitterly. I refused to sign off on the final compliance check. They told me if I did not quit, they would frame me for embezzlement. So I quit. I lost my license. I lost my career. Now I pour beer for hipsters. You can get it back, I said. Help me. Help me bury them. He hesitated. He looked at the door, as if expecting Gregory Dale to walk in with a subpoena. I do not have the papers, he said. They scrubbed the physical file. But, I pressed, I knew there was a but. Banking systems never truly forgot. But before I left, Nolan said, glancing around again, I printed the system logs, not the official statements, the back-end audit trails, the metadata. It shows the IP address where the request originated. It shows the timestamp of when the beneficiary field was manually overridden. "Where are they?" I asked. "In a safety deposit box across town," he said. "I kept them as insurance, in case they ever came after me." "Show me," I said. "Please." We met the next morning at a different bank. Nolan handed me a folder. I opened it, and the numbers danced before my eyes. The logs were undeniable. Date, October 14th. Time, 10:45 a.m. Action, beneficiary modification. Account, Hartley. Future trust, user ID, admin override. Origin IP address, 1080 High Ridge Lane. I looked at the address. It was the carriage house, the family office. "Arthur was in the hospital that day," I said, my voice shaking. "He was in the ICU. He could not have logged in, and he certainly was not at the carriage house." "Exactly," Nolan said. "And look at the next line. Action, wire transfer. Amount, $20 million. Destination, Vista Legacy. Consulting." "This proves it," I said. "This proves it was not Arthur. It proves they did it from their own office, using an admin override while he was dying." "It proves wire fraud," Nolan said. "It proves forgery. It proves a dozen federal crimes. But Lena, listen to me. You cannot just take this to the police. The police do not understand this stuff. And the Hartleys? They own the local judges. You try to sue them in civil court. Dale will bury you in motions until you run out of money." He was right. I had the smoking gun. But I was standing in front of a fortress with a water pistol. I needed a cannon. "I need a prosecutor," I said. "I need someone federal. Someone who hates financial predators more than they love their golf buddies." "You need the High Plains office," Nolan said. "There is a woman there, Monroe. I used to see her name on subpoenas when I worked at the bank. She is a bulldog. She took down the McKinnon Ponzi scheme last year." Talia Monroe. I repeated the name. It sounded like a lifeline. I looked at the logs one last time. The timestamps, the IP addresses, the cold digital footprint of my family's greed. They thought they had erased the crime. They thought firing Nolan and scaring me would be enough. But they had left ghosts behind. And now, I had the ghosts in a folder. "Thank you, Nolan," I said. "Watch your back, Lena," he said, his eyes dark. "If they hit you for 100,000, they will kill you for 20 million. I walked out into the sunlight. The fear was still there, churning in my stomach. But it was different now. It was fuel. I had the map. I had the witness. I had the proof. I was not just the victim anymore. I was the hunter. And I was going to find Talia Monroe and hand her the weapon that would bring the Hartley Empire crashing down. The United States Attorney's Office for the High Plains District did not look like the law firms my family kept on retainer. There were no plush carpets, no mahogany paneling, and certainly no espresso machines waiting in the lobby. It was a government building, sterile and imposing, smelling of floor wax and serious intent. I sat in a metal chair that was bolted to the floor, clutching my bag of evidence as if it contained uranium. When I was finally called back, Talia Monroe was waiting for me. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to have seen every variety of human deception. Her office was small, cluttered with file boxes, and devoid of personal touches save for a single framed degree. She did not offer me coffee. She simply pointed to the chair opposite her desk and asked me to start from the beginning. I told her everything. I told her about the morning I found my savings account empty. I told her about the confrontation in the kitchen, the slap that stung my cheek, and the punch to the ribs that bruised my soul. I told her about the $100,000 and how that missing sum was just the tremor before the earthquake. Then I put Arthur's files on her desk. I laid out the forged modification documents, the anonymous internal memo, and finally, the server logs Nolan Price had risked his career to save. Talia listened in silence. For the first 20 minutes, I could see the skepticism in the set of her jaw. She was a federal prosecutor. She likely saw dozens of disgruntled heirs every year, crying about daddy's money and mommy's favorites. To her, a family fighting over an inheritance was a civil matter, a waste of federal resources. "Ms. Hartley," she said, leaning back in her chair and tenting her fingers, "I appreciate you coming in, but what you are describing sounds like a probate dispute. If you believe the will was unfair, you need a probate attorney, not the Department of Justice." "It is not about fairness," I said, my voice steady. "It is about fraud. Look at the last page. Look at the timestamp." Talia sighed, clearly ready to dismiss me, but she pulled the server log toward her. Her eyes scanned the lines of data. She stopped. She looked up at me, then back at the paper. She reached for her computer mouse and clicked something on her screen, likely checking a calendar or a reference file. "The date of the beneficiary modification," I said, pointing to the line. "October 14th, 10:45 in the morning." "I see it," Talia said slowly. "My grandfather, Arthur Hartley, was admitted to the intensive care unit at St. Jude's Hospital on October 13th at 9 in the evening." I said, "He was heavily sedated and intubated by 10 o'clock the next morning. He could not have lifted a finger, let alone logged into a secure banking portal to authorize a transfer of $20 million. Talia looked at the IP address on the log. Then she looked at the address I had circled on the corporate registration for Vista Legacy Consulting. 1080 High Ridge Lane, she read aloud. "That is not the hospital." "That is the carriage house behind my father's estate," I said. "It is Victoria's office." The air in the room changed instantly. The skepticism vanished, replaced by the predatory focus of a hunter who has just caught a scent. Talia sat up straight. She picked up the phone on her desk and punched a button. "Hold my calls," she said, "and bring me the whiteboard from conference room B." For the next 3 hours, we turned her office into a war room. Talia stood at the whiteboard, a blue marker in her hand, while I read off dates and amounts. We built a timeline that spanned 5 years. We started with the creation of the Hartley Future Trust. Then came the timeline of Victoria's pressure campaigns, detailed in Arthur's handwritten notes. We marked the day I was beaten over the $100,000, a date Talia circled twice. "This assault," Talia said, tapping the board. "This is critical, in a vacuum. It is domestic violence, but on this timeline, it is witness intimidation. It establishes a pattern. They were testing your perimeter. They needed to know if you would fold under pressure before they executed the main heist. Then we added the stroke, the hospital admission, and the fraudulent login. Finally, we drew the line connecting the stolen $20 million to the shell companies." Talia stepped back, capped the marker, and looked at the diagram. It was ugly. It was a picture of systematic predation. "We are not looking at a civil lawsuit anymore," Talia said, her voice hard. "This is elder financial abuse, certainly, but because they used the banking system and wire transfers to move the money across state lines into these shell LLCs. We are looking at federal wire fraud. We are looking at bank fraud. And given the amount, we are looking at 20 years in federal prison for everyone involved." "Can we prove it?" I asked. "They have lawyers. They have money. They will say Arthur gave them his password before he got sick. They will say it was his dying wish." "We need a witness," Talia said. "Nolan Price establishes the technical fraud, but he was on the outside looking in. We need someone who was in the room, someone who saw the intent." I reached into my bag and pulled out the screenshot of the email I had received in the anonymous envelope. "Marianne Cole," I said. "She was the chief financial officer for Hartley Ridge Developments for 15 years. She quit suddenly a year after Arthur died. This email. She wrote it to Victoria. She warned her." Talia read the screenshot. "If she wrote this, she is liable. She knew about the crime." "She tried to stop it," I argued. "That is why she left, or maybe that is why they forced her out." "Let us find her," Talia said. It took 2 days to track Marianne Cole down. She was not working in finance anymore. She was running a small bakery in a suburb on the other side of Denver. trying to stay as far away from the corporate world as possible. When Talia and I walked into the shop, the bell above the door jingled cheerfully. Marianne was behind the counter, frosting a tray of cupcakes. She looked happy, peaceful even, but when she looked up and saw me, the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She dropped the piping bag. "Lena," she whispered. She looked at Talia, seeing the badge on her belt. "Oh God, they found me." "We are not here to hurt you, Marianne," I said, walking to the counter. "We know you tried to warn them." "I cannot talk to you," she said, her hands shaking as she wiped them on her apron. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement. If I say a word, Victoria will sue me for everything I have. She will take this shop. She will take my house." "Victoria cannot enforce a non-disclosure agreement to cover up a felony," Talia said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, authoritative. "I am Assistant United States Attorney Talia Monroe, and right now, Marianne, you are standing on a precipice. You can be a co-conspirator in a $20 million bank fraud case, or you can be a witness for the prosecution." Marianne looked between us. She looked terrified. I pulled the photocopy of the email out of my pocket and placed it on the glass display case, right over a tray of lemon tarts. "Someone sent me this," I said. "Someone inside the company still has a conscience. You wrote this. Marianne, you told her the signature was wrong. You told her to stop." Marianne stared at the email. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I told her," Marianne choked out. "I told her it was illegal. She laughed at me." "Tell us," Talia said softly. "Tell us what happened." Marianne flipped the sign on the door to closed and locked it. We sat at a small metal table in the corner of the bakery. Marianne kept looking out the window, as if expecting Victoria's black SUV to pull up at any moment. "It was at the Hartley Mountain Lodge," Marianne began, her voice trembling. "About a week after Arthur died, Victoria called a private meeting. It was just her, Richard, the lawyer Gregory Dale, and me. It was late, snowing outside. The fire was roaring, but the room felt freezing." She took a deep breath, twisting her apron in her hands. Victoria had a stack of documents on the table. She called it administrative cleanup. She wanted me to backdate a series of authorization forms to make it look like the transfer of the $20 million had been approved by the board months before Arthur got sick. She wanted to create a paper trail to cover the digital one. "Did you sign them?" Talia asked, her pen poised over her notebook. "I refused at first," Marianne said. "I told her the auditors would never buy it. I told her the signature on the bank amendment was clearly forged. I asked her why she was doing this to you. You were Arthur's favorite. He wanted you to have that safety net." Marianne looked at me, her eyes full of pity. "What did she say?" I asked. I needed to hear it. "She looked me right in the eye," Marianne said. "She was drinking wine, swirling it in the glass like she was discussing the weather. She said, 'We are just cleaning up the mess that senile old man made. He was not in his right mind. He would have given the family fortune to a girl who does not know the value of $1. And then she said it." "Said what?" Talia pressed. "She said, 'Lena does not deserve anything. She is lucky we let her keep her last name. This money belongs to the people who built this empire, not the ones who leech off it.' She told me if I did not sign the backdated forms, she would frame me for embezzlement. She said she had already planted irregularities in my ledger access logs. She had me trapped." "So you signed," Talia said. "It was not a judgment. It was a confirmation." "I signed," Marianne whispered. "I signed, and then I resigned the next morning. I have lived in fear every day since. I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I disappeared, the guilt would go away. It never did." Talia closed her notebook. "Marianne, I can offer you a deal. If you testify to what you just told us, about the forgery, the coercion, the intent to defraud, I can grant you immunity from prosecution for your part in the paperwork. We can protect you." Marianne looked at her bakery, at the life she had built out of flour and sugar to escape the toxicity of my family. "She will destroy me in the press," Marianne said. "She will say I am a liar, a thief." "She will try," I said. I reached across the table and took Marianne's hand. But she beat me too. Marianne, she hit me. She stole from me. And I'm still standing. We can stop her, but only if we do this together. Marianne squeezed my hand back. It was weak, but it was there. Okay, she said. I will do it. I will sign the affidavit. Walking out of the bakery, the air felt different. We had the timeline. We had the technical proof. And now, we had the voice of someone who had been in the room where it happened. Talia stopped by her car and turned to me. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Listen to me closely. Lena, she said. Her face was grim. We have enough for a subpoena. We have enough to compel Evercrest to hand over the original physical files, the ones they claim are lost. Once I file that motion, there is no turning back. The moment that paper hits the court docket, Victoria will know. Richard will know. I know, I said. It will get ugly, Talia warned. When you come for $20 million, people do not just hire lawyers. They hire private investigators to dig through your trash. They leak stories to the press about your dating life, your mental health, your job performance. They will try to make you look like a monster. They will try to break you. I thought about the $100,000. I thought about the bruises. I thought about Arthur dying alone in a hospital room while his son and daughter-in-law were busy looting his accounts. They already tried to break me, I said. They failed. Talia nodded. A small, sharp smile touched her lips. Good answer. The next morning, Talia filed the request for a federal subpoena. It was a legal battering ram aimed directly at the front doors of Evercrest Private Banking. The document demanded the immediate surrender of all original files, metadata, and internal communications regarding the Hartley Future Trust, under penalty of obstruction of justice. 2 hours after the filing, my phone rang. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. Then a text came from Ethan. You are making a mistake. Call Mom. I deleted it. I stood at the window of my apartment, looking out at the Denver skyline. Somewhere in one of those high-rises, a fax machine was spitting out a document that signaled the end of the Hartley family's golden age. The Cold War was over. The silence was broken. We were going to trial, and for the first time in 3 years, I did not feel like the victim. I felt like the storm they had been warned about. News of a federal subpoena does not travel through the grapevine. It travels like a shockwave. Within 48 hours of Talia filing the motion to compel Evercrest to release the original physical files, the silence from the Hartley estate was broken. My phone rang on a Thursday evening. I looked at the caller ID and felt a phantom pain in my ribs, a somatic echo of the bruising from 3 years ago. It was Victoria. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I sat on my couch, staring at the phone, waiting for the notification light to blink. When I finally played the message, her voice filled my small living room. It was not the voice of the woman who had screamed at me in the kitchen. It was the voice she used for charity galas and board meetings, smooth, cultured, and dripping with a sweetness that barely concealed the razor blades underneath. Lena, darling, she said, we heard about this legal misunderstanding you have started. Con, what are you doing? Do you intend to drag the entire family down with you? We need to talk, not through lawyers, just us. She did not wait for a call back. She texted 10 minutes later. Dinner, Saturday night, Hartley Mountain Lodge. Your father wants to clear the air. Do not make yourself a stranger. Lena, we are still family. I called Talia immediately. Do not go, Talia said, her voice sharp. It is a trap. They know we are close to the physical evidence. They want to intimidate you, or worse, buy you off. If you go up to that lodge, you are on their territory, miles from help. I have to go, I said, looking at the text. If they are scared enough to call me after 3 years, they are scared enough to make a mistake. I need them to say it. Talia, I have the logs, and I have Marianne, but I need them to admit it. I need the jury to hear their voices. It is too dangerous, Talia warned. Victoria has already proven she is capable of physical violence. I will be careful, I said. I will wear a wire. We cannot get a warrant for a wire that fast, Talia said. And if it malfunctions, I will use my phone, I said. I will put it in airplane mode so it does not ring. And I will keep the voice memo app running in my front pocket. High sensitivity recording. I just need 5 minutes of truth. Saturday evening came with a biting wind coming off the Rockies. I drove my beat-up sedan up the winding private road that led to the Hartley Mountain Lodge. This was the family's crown jewel, a sprawling timber and stone retreat that sat on 500 acres of private forest. It was where we spent Christmases when I was a child. It was where I learned to ski. And it was where, I realized with a pang of bitterness, I had last felt like I belonged before Victoria slowly excised me from the narrative. The lodge was lit up like a beacon against the dark pine trees. I parked next to Ethan's bright red sports car and my father's armored SUV. My car looked like a piece of scrap metal next to them. I took a deep breath. I checked my phone. Battery full. Airplane mode on. Recording app open. I hit the red button and watched the timer start counting seconds. I slid it into the breast pocket of my blazer. Camera lens facing out. Microphone unblocked. I walked up the stone steps. The heavy wooden door opened before I could knock. "Lena," Victoria said. She was wearing a white cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my rent. She opened her arms as if to hug me, but I stopped, just out of reach. She dropped her arms gracefully, her smile never faltering. "Come in. It is freezing out there." I stepped inside. The great room was exactly as I remembered it. Vaulted ceilings, a fireplace big enough to roast a whole pig, and walls adorned with expensive local art. But as I walked toward the dining area, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The hallway was lined with family photos. There was Richard and Victoria at a gala. Ethan graduating from private school. The three of them skiing in Aspen. There was not a single photo of me. It was as if I had been erased from history the moment I turned 18. My father was sitting at the head of the long dining table. He looked older, his skin gray and papery. He did not stand up when I entered. He just nodded. A gesture so minimal it was almost insulting. Ethan was pouring himself a glass of whiskey at the sidebar, looking tense. "Sit down," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair on the side, creating a triangle of confrontation. "We ordered catering from the bistro in town. Your favorite risotto." I sat. I did not touch the napkin. I did not touch the water glass. "Let us skip the pleasantries," I said. My heart was hammering against the phone in my pocket. "Why am I here, Victoria?" Victoria sat opposite me. She clasped her hands on the table. "We want to apologize," she said. I blinked. It was the last thing I expected her to say. "Apologize?" I repeated. "For that day in the kitchen," Victoria said. She looked down at her hands, performing remorse. 3 years ago, things were tense. The market was down. Cash flow was tight. And when you came in shouting about money, I snapped. I should not have raised my hand to you. It was a reflex. I was under an immense amount of stress, and it was an unfortunate accident." "An accident," I said flatly. "You slapped me. Then you punched me in the ribs. Then you shoved me against a counter. That is not a reflex. Victoria, that is assault." "It was a family dispute that got out of hand." Richard spoke up from the head of the table. His voice was weak. "We all regret it. Lena, but you have to understand, bringing federal prosecutors into a family matter, it is extreme." "It is not a family matter," I said, turning to look at him. "It is a $20 million matter. You stole the trust. Dad, Arthur showed me the papers. He showed me the balance. And you stole it." Victoria's eyes hardened. The mask of the apologetic mother slipped, revealing the cold calculator underneath. "You do not understand the big picture," she said. "You never have. You think $20 million is just a number in a bank account. It is leverage. It is liquidity for the developments. That money belongs to the people who know how to use it to keep this family on top, not to someone who would waste it on whatever small life you are living." "It belonged to me," I said. "Grandpa Arthur left it to me specifically because he knew you would say exactly that. Ethan slammed his glass down on the sidebar. The sound echoed in the high ceiling. "You are ruining everything," he shouted, walking over to the table. "Do you know what the rumors are doing to our credit line? Do you know what people are saying? You are acting like a spoiled brat who didn't get a pony." He pulled a folded document out of his jacket pocket and slid it across the polished wood table toward me. "We are done playing games," Ethan said. "Sign this." I looked down at the paper. It was a legal waiver. Settlement and release of claims. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a reset button," Victoria said, her voice regaining that silky, dangerous quality. "You sign that, and you drop this ridiculous investigation. You tell your prosecutor friend that you were mistaken, that you found the missing documents and realized there was no trust. You walk away." "And in exchange?" I asked. $500,000, Ethan said. "We will wire it to you tonight, $500,000. Lena, you can buy a house. You can start over. You can stop pretending you are a detective and go back to being nobody." $500,000. It was a bribe, and it was an admission of guilt. Innocent people do not pay $500,000 to make a misunderstanding go away. I reached out and touched the paper. I needed them to be specific. I needed them to spell it out for the recording. "This waiver," I said, acting hesitant, "does it cover everything? Even the changes to the paperwork?" "It covers everything," Victoria said, leaning forward, her eyes predatory. "It waives your right to any claim on the Hartley Future Trust. It waives any claim regarding the beneficiary modifications. It creates a clean slate." "But the signature," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The bank will know the signature on the modification was not Arthur's. If I sign this, am I admitting I knew?" Victoria laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "The bank does not care. Lena, the bank works for us. We fixed the signature because we had to. Your father and I spent months setting up that transfer structure. Do you think we were going to let a senile old man ruin the company just because he suddenly developed a conscience? If you had just been a good girl from the start, we would not have had to go to such lengths." "So you admit it?" I asked, looking her in the eye. "You admit you changed the beneficiary from me to Vista Legacy? You admit you forged his name?" Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "Yes, we moved the money. Are you happy? We took it out of the hands of a dying man who was being manipulated by sentimentality, and we put it where it belonged. We created Vista Legacy to save this family, and I will not let you destroy it." There it was, the confession, clear as a bell. I pulled my hand back from the paper. "I am not signing this," I said. The air in the room froze. Richard looked down at his plate. Ethan looked at his mother. Victoria stood up. She moved around the table with a speed that was terrifying. Before I could stand, she was standing over me. She reached out and grabbed my chin, her fingers digging into my jaw with bruising force. She forced my head up to look at her. "You listen to me, you little ungrateful wretch," she hissed. Her face was inches from mine. I could smell the expensive wine on her breath. "Do not forget what I did to you over $100,000. That was a warning. This is the end game. You think I am afraid to leave a few more marks on you to protect 20 million? I will bury you so deep no one will ever find you." My heart was pounding so hard, I thought the microphone would pick it up. This was the threat. This was the link between the violence and the money. "Get off me," I said, pulling my face away from her grip. Ethan stepped forward, looking panicked. He grabbed Victoria's arm. "Mom, stop," he said. "Not here." "She needs to learn," Victoria screamed, her composure completely gone. "She is not worth it," Ethan yelled back. "Just pay her off. We used her $100,000 for the deposit on the Aspen deal. Isn't that enough? We took her savings. We took her trust. Just give her the buyout and let her go." Time seemed to stop. Ethan froze. He looked at me. He saw the way I was looking at him, not with fear, but with a sudden, sharp clarity. "You used my $100,000 for the Aspen deposit?" I asked quietly. Ethan's face went pale. He looked at his mother. then back at me. He realized what he had just said. He had just admitted that the initial theft, the one they claimed was a loan recall, was actually embezzlement to fund a specific business deal. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I forced them to hold me. "I am leaving," I said. "You are not going anywhere until you sign that," Victoria said, blocking my path to the door. "If I do not walk out that door in 30 seconds, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "my friend Talia Monroe is going to send federal marshals to this address. She knows I am here. She knows exactly what time I arrived." It was a bluff. Talia was probably pacing her apartment, but she could not summon marshals on a hunch. But Victoria did not know that. Fear flickered in her eyes. She looked at Richard. "Let her go, Vic," Richard said. It was the first time he had spoken in minutes. He sounded defeated. "Let her go." Victoria stared at me with pure hatred. "You will regret this." "I doubt it," I said. I walked past her. I walked past Ethan, who was staring at the floor. I walked out the heavy wooden door and into the cold mountain air. I did not run. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and got in. I locked the doors. My hands were trembling so badly I dropped the keys twice before I could get them into the ignition. I drove down the mountain road, checking the rearview mirror every 5 seconds to see if headlights were following me. There was nothing but darkness. When I hit the main highway, I finally pulled over into a lit gas station parking lot. I pulled the phone out of my pocket. I stopped the recording. My thumb hovered over the play button. I pressed it. The sound was crisp. "Yes, we moved the money. Are you happy? We took it out of the hands of a dying man. Do not forget what I did to you over $100,000. We used her $100,000 for the deposit on the Aspen deal." I slumped back against the seat. Letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 years. I had it. I had the forgery. I had the shell company. I had the physical assault connected to the financial crime. And I had the specific usage of the stolen funds. I looked at the phone. It was not just a recording. It was a $20 million weapon. I put the car in gear and drove back toward the city. I needed to get to Talia. The war was not over. But for the first time, I had the nuclear codes. I sat in the stiff leather chair of Talia Monroe's office, watching the digital waveform on her computer screen flatline as the recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator that had just realized the trap had snapped shut. Talia took off her headphones and set them down on the desk with deliberate slowness. She looked at me, her expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, she let out a breath that sounded like a laugh of disbelief. "That," Talia said, tapping the desk with her index finger, "is not just evidence, Lena. That is a confession wrapped in a threat and tied with a bow of extortion." "Is it enough?" I asked. My hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the encounter at the lodge. "Enough?" Talia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. "Victoria admitted to the forgery. Ethan admitted to the embezzlement of your savings for a specific commercial deal, and they both attempted to coerce you into signing a waiver in exchange for hush money. This recording transforms the case from a complex financial investigation into a clear-cut conspiracy." She turned back to me, her eyes hard. "But we are not stopping here. A jury loves a recording, but a judge needs paper. We are going to bury them in paper." The next 2 weeks were a blur of subpoenas and forensic analysis. With the recording as probable cause, Talia secured a court order compelling Evercrest Private Banking to release the original signature cards they had claimed were lost. When the bank's legal team tried to stall, Judge Harper threatened to hold the branch manager in contempt. The files appeared on Talia's desk the next morning. We brought in Dr. Eris Thorne from Forensic Script Analytics. He was a man who looked more like a librarian than a crime scene investigator, with thick glasses and an obsession with ink density. He set up a workspace in the conference room, using high-resolution scanners and magnification lamps to compare Arthur's known signatures from 5 years ago against the signature on the modification document. I watched him work one afternoon. He projected the images onto a screen. "Look here," Dr. Thorne said, using a laser pointer to trace the loop of the letter H in Hartley. Arthur Hartley was right-handed, even after his stroke. The tremors in his writing followed a specific downward drag pattern consistent with right-side weakness. But this signature on the amendment? He clicked to the next slide. The signature looked shaky. Yes, but the lines were wrong. The pressure points are inverted, Dr. Thorne explained. The person who wrote this was trying to simulate a tremor, but they applied pressure on the upstrokes, not the downstrokes. And see the ink pooling here? That suggests hesitation. This was drawn, not written, and based on the angle of the pen strokes, I would bet my license that the forger was left-handed. I thought about Victoria. She was left-handed. I remembered watching her slice fruit in the kitchen with the knife in her left hand. It is a forgery, Dr. Thorne concluded, and a clumsy one at that. While Dr. Thorne was dissecting the ink, we received the server logs from Evercrest's central IT department, which had finally caved under federal pressure. Nolan Price's backup data had been accurate, but the official logs were even more damning. They showed the login to the trust account occurred at 10:45 in the morning on October 14th. Talia cross-referenced the IP address. It did not just match the carriage house. It matched the specific static IP assigned to the secure server in the office of the family attorney, Gregory Dale. They did not even do it from the house, Talia said, pinning the log to the evidence board. They did it from the lawyer's office. Dale is not just their counsel, Lena. He is a co-conspirator. This realization shifted the target. We needed to get into the files of Hawthorne and Keene, the firm that had handled Arthur's estate. But when Talia served a warrant for their internal communications regarding the trust, the response was immediate and suspicious. Data corruption. Talia read the letter from their managing partner, tossing it onto the table in disgust. They claim they had a catastrophic server failure 3 years ago that wiped out all client emails from that specific quarter. Convenient. They are destroying evidence, I said. They know we are coming. They can destroy digital files, Talia said. But people are harder to delete. Who was the associate handling Arthur's file? Dale is the partner, but he would not do the filing himself. We dug through the court filings from the probate hearing 3 years ago. There was a name listed as the preparer of the documents, Jenna Lewis. I looked her up. She was no longer at Hawthorne and Keene. She was working as an administrative registrar at a small law school in Boulder. I will go talk to her, I said. Take a marshal, Talia advised. No, I said. If she sees a badge, she will lawyer up. She needs to see me. I found Jenna Lewis in a cramped office buried in the basement of the law library. She looked tired, surrounded by stacks of student applications. When I knocked on the doorframe, she looked up, and I saw the recognition instant in her eyes. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. Ms. Lewis, I said. I am Lena Hartley. I cannot talk to you, she said immediately, standing up and gathering her purse as if to bolt. I signed a confidentiality agreement. Please leave. I stepped into the room and closed the door gently. I know about the server crash, Jenna, I said. I know that Gregory Dale and Victoria Hartley wiped the files, but I also know that Arthur liked you. He mentioned you in his journals. He said you were the only one at that firm who looked him in the eye. Jenna stopped. Her hands were trembling. They will ruin me, she whispered. You do not know what they are capable of. Victoria Hartley threatened to have me disbarred if I ever spoke about the amendment. She threatened me too, I said. I pulled out my phone. She did more than threaten. She beat me, and then she admitted it. I played a 10-second clip of the recording from the lodge. Victoria's voice rang out in the small office. We took it out of the hands of a dying man. Jenna sat down heavily in her chair. She put her face in her hands. I knew it, she said, her voice muffled. I knew they would come for you eventually. Jenna, I said, walking over to her desk. The server crash. Did they really wipe everything? Jenna looked up. Her eyes were wet. Dale ordered the wipe, she said. But before he did, Arthur came in. It was 2 weeks before his stroke. He was lucid. He was scared. He told me he thought his son and daughter-in-law were trying to declare him incompetent to take control of the trust. He brought something with him. My heart skipped a beat. What did he bring? A digital recorder, Jenna said. He made a statement. He told me to file it with his will. He said, "This is my insurance policy," but when he died, Dale took the physical file and shredded it. He told me the recording never existed. But, I pressed. I knew there was a but. Jenna opened the bottom drawer of her desk. She reached into the back, behind a box of staples, and pulled out a small silver USB drive. I made a copy, she said. I do not know why. Maybe because I hated Dale. Maybe because Arthur reminded me of my own grandfather. But I copied the audio file before the server was wiped. I have kept it in this drawer for 3 years, terrified that someone would find it. She held the drive out to me. Take it, she said. Please, just take it and make them pay. I drove straight to Talia's office. We plugged the USB drive into her computer. The room was silent as we clicked the file named AH Statement Final, Wave. There was a burst of static, and then Arthur's voice filled the room. It was strong, clear, and undeniably him. My name is Arthur William Hartley. Today is September the 4th. I am making this recording to be played in the event that my mental competency is challenged or the terms of the Hartley Future Trust are altered in any way. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. It was like he was in the room with us. Let me be clear. Arthur's voice continued. The $20 million in the Hartley Future Trust is for the sole benefit of my granddaughter, Lena Hartley. My son Richard and his wife Victoria have pressured me repeatedly to dissolve this trust. I have refused. If I die, or if I am incapacitated, and this money is moved to any other entity, know that it was done against my will. If Lena stands before any judge, tell them that this $20 million is hers, and hers alone. Do not let them steal her future. The recording ended. Talia sat back in her chair. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a fierce grin break through her professional mask. Well, Talia said, that is the nail in the coffin. With the forensic analysis of the forgery, the server logs proving the location of the crime, the recording of Victoria's confession, and now Arthur's voice from the grave, the case had evolved into a monster. Talia did not wait. She convened a grand jury the following Tuesday. I did not have to testify yet. Talia presented the evidence. She played the tapes. She showed the charts. She walked the grand jurors through the timeline of greed and violence. It took them less than 2 hours to return a true bill. The indictments were unsealed on a Friday morning. The United States of America versus Victoria Hartley, Richard Hartley, and Ethan Hartley. The charges were extensive. Victoria was charged with 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of bank fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and 1 count of witness tampering. Richard was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aiding and abetting. Ethan was charged with receipt of stolen funds and conspiracy. When the news broke, it did not just make the local paper, it exploded. I was sitting in my office at Northbridge when my phone started vibrating. It did not stop. Text messages, news alerts, calls from numbers I did not recognize. I opened a news app on my computer. The headline was in bold, black letters. Hartley Empire crumbles. Real estate tycoons indicted in $20 million trust fraud scheme. There was a picture of Victoria, looking glamorous at a charity event, next to a mugshot-style layout of the charges, and then there was my name. Whistleblower daughter Lena Hartley exposes massive family theft. I walked out of my office building an hour later to find a sea of reporters. They were not the polite society photographers Victoria was used to. These were crime reporters. They shouted questions that hit me like physical blows. Lena, did you know about the forgery? Lena, is it true your stepmother assaulted you? Lena, are you suing for the full $20 million? 3 years ago, they had called me the greedy daughter. They had painted me as the villain who wanted to snatch money from her hard-working parents. Now, The narrative had flipped so violently it gave me whiplash. I was the victim. I was the hero. I was the brave survivor of a toxic family dynasty. I kept my head down and pushed through the crowd to where Talia's car was waiting. I slid into the passenger seat, and she locked the doors. "Welcome to the circus," Talia said, pulling away from the curb. "Is it over?" I asked, watching the reporters chase the car. "No," Talia said. "This is just the opening ceremony. They have been arrested, but they made bail an hour ago. They are back in that mansion, and they are cornered animals. They will come at you with everything they have left." I looked at the passing city. I saw a billboard for a new Hartley Ridge development, a luxury condo complex promising a legacy of excellence. "Let them come," I said. "I have nothing left to hide. Arthur told the truth. Now it is my turn." That night, I sat in my apartment. I did not turn on the lights. I watched the news coverage on mute. I saw footage of Richard and Victoria walking out of the federal courthouse, shielding their faces. For the first time in my life, Victoria looked disheveled. Her hair was messy. She looked old. And Richard just looked like a ghost. I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. I had done it. I had pulled the thread, and the whole tapestry had unraveled. But there was no joy in it. There was only the cold satisfaction of balancing an equation that had been wrong for a very long time. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think you have won, but we are going to destroy you in court. Watch your back." I did not reply. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Talia. Then I went to the closet and pulled out the old coat, the one I had hidden the files in for 3 years. I put it on. It felt like armor. The legal battle was about to begin, but the truth was already out. The $20 million secret was no longer a secret. It was a noose, and it was tightening around their necks with every passing hour. I went to sleep that night and dreamed of Arthur. He was standing in his cabin, smiling. He did not say anything. He just nodded, and for the first time in 3 years, I slept without waking up afraid. The aftermath of the indictment was not the victory parade I had naively imagined. I thought the truth would set me free, but instead, it painted a target on my back. The court of public opinion does not operate on evidence. It operates on narrative, and the Hartley family had enough money to buy a very compelling narrative. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the internet became a weapon. My social media accounts were flooded with anonymous comments. They called me a gold digger. They called me the ungrateful daughter who was willing to destroy her elderly father's reputation for a payout. One comment, which garnered thousands of likes on a local news page, read, "She is trading her parents for a check. Some people have no soul, just a calculator where their heart should be." They spun the story of the $100,000 not as theft, but as a spoiled child's tantrum. They claimed the $20 million trust was a fabrication of my own greed, a senile delusion I had manipulated into existence. Walking down the street in Denver felt like walking through a minefield. I felt eyes on me everywhere, judging, assessing, hating. Then, the threat moved from the digital world to the physical one. I came home late one Tuesday evening after a strategy session with Talia. My apartment building was in a secure complex, or so I thought. As I walked down the hallway toward my unit, I saw it. The wood around my doorframe was splintered. The lock had been drilled out. My heart stopped. I pushed the door open with my toe, terrifying scenarios racing through my mind. The apartment had been tossed. It was not a random burglary. My television was still on the wall. My laptop was still on the coffee table. My jewelry box was untouched. But the file cabinets where I kept my copies of the case documents had been ripped open. Papers were strewn across the floor like snow. The cushions of my sofa had been slashed, as if someone was looking for something hidden deep inside. They were looking for the originals. They were looking for the USB drive Jenna Lewis had given me, or perhaps the original bank files Arthur had entrusted to me. Fortunately, those were locked in a federal evidence vault, not my linen closet. I called the police, and then I called Talia. When the building superintendent pulled the security footage, the image was grainy but unmistakable. A man in a dark jacket and a baseball cap had slipped in through the service entrance. He kept his head down, but at one moment, he looked up at the camera. I froze. I know him. "Who is he?" the police officer asked. "That is Marcus," I said, my voice cold. "He has been Victoria's private driver for 10 years. They were not just trying to scare me anymore, they were hunting." Talia did not take chances. Within 24 hours, I was moved to a temporary safe house, and my apartment was fitted with reinforced locks and a direct line alarm system to the marshals. I was assigned a plainclothes officer to shadow me. The message from the Hartley estate was clear: "We can get to you." But just as their pressure mounted, the universe tipped the scales back in my favor. A courier arrived at the federal prosecutor's office 2 days later with a thick envelope addressed to Talia Monroe. There was no return address, but the postmark was local. Talia called me in immediately. She was wearing latex gloves as she held up the single item that had been inside the envelope. It was a photograph, an old, glossy photograph, printed on actual photo paper, not a digital printout. It showed Arthur's old study in the Hartley mansion. I recognized the room instantly: the heavy mahogany desk, the leather chair, the walls lined with first editions. "Look at the wall," Talia said, pointing to a specific spot in the photo. Hanging behind the desk was a large oil painting of a Rocky Mountain landscape, a serene valley with a snow-capped peak. It was a painting I had stared at 1,000 times as a child while Arthur told me stories. But on this photograph, someone had taken a red permanent marker and drawn a thick, violent X right over the mountain peak. "What does it mean?" Talia asked. "Is it a threat? Are they saying X marks the spot where they killed his legacy?" I stared at the painting. A memory surfaced, clear and sharp as glass. I was 10 years old, playing hide-and-seek in that study. Arthur had caught me trying to hide under his desk. He had laughed and pulled me onto his lap. I remembered asking him where he hid his pirate treasure. He had looked at that painting and whispered, "The most important things are never in someone else's safe. Lena, you keep them where only you can see the horizon." "It is not a threat," I said, my pulse quickening. "It is a map." "A map to what?" "A safe," I said. Arthur never trusted the wall safe in the master bedroom. He said it was too obvious. He told me once that he kept his real thoughts behind the mountain. Talia looked at the photo, then at me. "You think there is a wall safe behind that painting?" "I do not think," I said. "I know. That is where he would put the things he did not want Victoria to find. If there are original documents, journals, anything proving his state of mind, they are in that wall." "If we are wrong," Talia said, "we are invading a private residence of indicted defendants on a hunch. It will look like harassment." "And if we are right," I countered, "it is the final nail." Talia nodded. She grabbed her phone. "I am calling Judge Harper." The defense team fought the search warrant with everything they had. They filed emergency motions claiming prosecutorial misconduct. They claimed the photograph was a fabrication. They claimed I was hallucinating memories. But Judge Harper, a woman who had little patience for obstructionist tactics, looked at the photo and then at the timeline of the fraud. "If there is nothing there, you have nothing to worry about," Judge Harper had ruled. "Warrant granted, but I want the search executed in the presence of opposing counsel. No surprises." We arrived at the Hartley estate at 9 in the morning. The convoy of federal vehicles looked out of place in the manicured driveway. I sat in the back of Talia's car, watching the house that used to be my home loom over us like a haunted castle. When we entered the foyer, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Victoria was standing by the grand staircase, wearing a silk dressing gown, clutching a handkerchief. She looked like a tragic opera heroine. "This is a violation," she cried out as the agents filed in. "My husband has a heart condition. You are killing him. How can you let that girl—" she pointed a trembling finger at me— "invade our sanctuary?" Richard was sitting in an armchair in the living room, clutching his chest, breathing dramatically. It was a performance worthy of an award, but I saw his eyes darting nervously toward the study. Ethan was pacing in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, shouting at someone. presumably a banker or another lawyer. He looked sweaty and panicked. "Ignore them," Talia commanded the agents. "Secure the study." We walked into the room. It smelled of lemon polish and stale air, as if no one had used it since Arthur died. The painting was there, exactly as I remembered it. The mountain peak rose majestically from the canvas, oblivious to the crimes committed in its shadow. Gregory Dale, the family lawyer, stood in the corner, his arms crossed, looking smug. "You are wasting your time," Dale sneered. "We have inventoried this house 3 times. There is no safe here." "Take it down," Talia ordered. 2 agents stepped forward. They lifted the heavy frame off the wall. Victoria let out a sharp gasp from the doorway. Behind the painting, set flush into the dark wood paneling, was a steel square, a safe. It was not a modern digital one. It was an old-fashioned dial combination safe, heavy and impenetrable. The silence in the room was absolute. Richard stopped faking his heart attack and sat up straight. Ethan dropped his phone to his side. Victoria's face went the color of ash. "Well," Talia said, turning to Dale, "it seems your inventory was incomplete." "We do not have the combination," Dale said quickly, recovering his composure. "Arthur never gave it to anyone. You will need a drill team. It could take days." I stepped forward. I looked at the dial. It was worn smooth from years of Arthur's fingers turning it. "I want to try," I said. "Lena," Talia warned softly, "if you lock it out." "I know the number," I said. I felt it in my bones. I walked up to the safe. I felt the cold metal under my fingers. I closed my eyes and thought of Arthur. He was a man of sentiment. Hidden under layers of stoicism, he would not use a random number. He would use a date that mattered. Not his birthday, not his anniversary. He would use the date he became a grandfather. My birthday, May 14th. I spun the dial to the right. 0, 5. I spun it to the left. 1. I spun it to the right again. The final click was loud in the silent room. It sounded like a gunshot. I grasped the handle and pulled. The heavy steel door swung open with a groan of rusted hinges. Victoria let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She slumped against the doorframe, realizing that the ghost of the man she had tormented had just reached out from the grave to point a finger at her. I looked inside. There was no cash. There were no jewels. There was a stack of leather-bound notebooks, and on top of them, a thick cream-colored envelope. I reached in and took the envelope. My name was written on the front in Arthur's shaky, distinctive handwriting. Only to be opened if Lena is called to act against the family. My hands trembled as I held it. Talia stepped up beside me, handing me a pair of gloves, but she let me open it. Inside were 2 things. The first was a stack of original bank statements from Evercrest, dated 5 years ago. The originals that proved the $20 million was real. Showing the account number and the initial deposit, these were the documents the bank claimed were lost. These were the documents Dale claimed never existed. The second was a letter. I unfolded it. The paper was crisp. "My dearest Lena, if you are reading this, it means they have done exactly what I feared they would do. It means my son has lost his way, and his wife has finally let her greed consume her decency. I am leaving you the $20 million not because I want to make you rich, but because I want to make you free. You are the only one in this bloodline who has ever had the courage to say no to me. You are the only one who worked for a wage when you could have lived on an allowance. You are the only one who understands that money is a tool, not a god. Victoria will try to take it. She will say I was confused. She will say I was manipulated. But the enclosed journals document every conversation, every threat, and every attempt she made to coerce me into changing my will. I stayed silent to protect you while I was alive, but I prepared this to protect you when I'm gone. Do not let them bully you. Do not let them buy you. Take this money and build something real. Break the cycle. Love, Grandpa. I lowered the letter. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and fast. I turned to face the room. Talia was bagging the journals. evidence of coercion that would withstand any cross-examination. The agents were photographing the open safe. I looked at Victoria. She was not crying anymore. She was staring at the open safe with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She knew. She knew that Arthur had outsmarted her. She knew that her empire of lies had just been dismantled by a 4-digit code based on the birthday of the girl she despised. "He loved you," I said to my father, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "He loved you enough to try to save you from her, but you let him die thinking he had failed." Richard did not speak. He just closed his eyes, looking small and broken. "Bag everything," Talia ordered, her voice cutting through the emotion. "This is the ball game." I walked out of the study, clutching the copy of the letter Talia allowed me to keep. The air in the house felt different now. It didn't feel like a fortress of power anymore. It felt like a tomb that had finally been opened. The pressure of the internet, the break-in, the threats, it all fell away. They had tried to bury the truth in a wall safe, thinking no one would look behind the landscape. But they forgot that Arthur had taught me to look at the horizon. We had the physical proof. We had the confession. We had the motive. The trial was no longer a question of if we would win. It was a question of how long the sentence would be. The first day of the trial felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a public execution, with me as the one standing on the gallows while my family tightened the noose. The federal courthouse in Denver was packed to capacity. Every seat in the gallery was filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and the high society friends Victoria had cultivated over 30 years of charity galas and board meetings. They whispered behind their hands as I walked in, their eyes raking over my simple gray suit as if searching for the cracks in my psyche that the defense team had promised them were there. Judge Harper banged her gavel to bring the room to order, but the noise inside my head did not stop. I sat next to Talia Monroe, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my fingernails dug crescents into my palms. Talia looked calm, her notes arranged in a perfect grid on the table, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. We had the evidence. Yes, we had the journals. We had the confession on tape. But trials are not just about facts. They are about storytelling. And Gregory Dale, the lawyer representing my family, was a master storyteller. Dale stood up for his opening statement. He buttoned his jacket with a slow, deliberate movement, signaling to the jury that he was a reasonable man about to explain a very unreasonable situation. He walked to the jury box, making eye contact with each juror, his voice a low, soothing baritone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, placing a hand over his heart, "you are going to hear a lot of noise in this trial. You are going to hear about complex bank transfers and missing files. But at its core, this is not a case about fraud. It is a tragedy about a family. It is a story about a troubled young woman, Lena Hartley, who could never quite find her place in a world of high expectations. It is a story about a daughter who looked at her parents' success and saw only what she felt she was owed." He turned and pointed a finger at me. It felt like a physical blow. "This is a witch hunt, pure and simple, driven by jealousy, fueled by instability, and motivated by a desperate need for money. Lena Hartley has concocted a fantasy where her loving father and stepmother are villains, simply because they refuse to hand over $20 million to a woman who has a history of impulsive, erratic behavior." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout about the bruises on my ribs, about the forged signatures, about the lies, but I sat frozen, forced to listen as he dismantled my character brick by brick. The parade of witnesses that followed was a masterclass in gaslighting. Dale did not call the bankers or the forensic accountants first. He called the character witnesses. First came Mrs. Vanderwall, a neighbor who lived 3 houses down from the estate. She sat in the witness box, clutching her pearls, recounting a time 10 years ago when she saw me arguing with Victoria in the driveway. Lena was always so volatile. Mrs. Vanderwall testified, shaking her head sadly. She would scream and stomp her feet. Victoria was a saint to deal with her. I always worried for poor Richard's heart. Next came a string of women from Victoria's charity foundations. They painted a picture of Victoria as a selfless philanthropist who spent her days worrying about orphans and the arts, while I was the distant, cold stepdaughter who never showed up for Thanksgiving. They made me sound like a monster who had rejected a loving mother's embrace. But the worst blow came from Silas Henderson. He was a former board member of Hartley Ridge Developments. A man I knew for a fact had received a generous consulting contract from Victoria just 2 months ago. He sat on the stand, looking grave. Dale asked him about my relationship with Arthur. Mr. Henderson sighed. It was difficult to watch. Arthur was declining in his final years. He was confused, vulnerable. I remember one afternoon, I walked into the study, and I saw Lena there. She was gripping Arthur's arm. Hard. She was shaking him, demanding he sign some papers. Arthur looked terrified. I almost intervened, but she stormed out before I could. The lie was so audacious it took the air out of my lungs. I had never grabbed Arthur. I had never raised my voice to him. Henderson was projecting Victoria's violence onto me, twisting reality so completely that the jury looked at me with genuine disgust. I saw a woman in the back row of the jury box narrow her eyes at me, and I knew she believed him. Then came the emails. Dale projected a series of emails onto the large screens in the courtroom. They were real emails I had sent to my father years ago, but they had been surgically edited. One email, where I had written, "I am frustrated that I'm not being included in the decision-making process regarding the new logistics software, considering it is my field of expertise," had been cropped to read, "I am frustrated that I'm not being included. It is my field. I demand to be part of the decision." Another email, where I asked about my tuition reimbursement, was presented out of context to make me look like I was constantly begging for money. "See the pattern?" Dale asked the jury. Demand after demand. Money, power, control. And when she did not get it, she decided to burn the house down. By the time Victoria took the stand, I felt small. I felt like the crazy, greedy child they were describing. Victoria was dressed in a soft blue suit, a color chosen to make her look soft, maternal. She did not look at me. She looked at the jury, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Dale asked her about the incident in the kitchen, the day she beat me for asking about $100,000. Victoria took a deep breath and dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "It was a terrible day," she said, her voice trembling. "The market had crashed. We were hemorrhaging money. Richard was on the verge of a breakdown. Lena came in. She was screaming. She was demanding $100,000 immediately. I tried to calm her down. I told her we needed time, but she got in my face. She was so angry. She shoved me against the counter." She paused, letting the silence stretch. I reacted. She whispered. It was a reflex. I slapped her to get her to stop. It was defensive. I have regretted it every single day since, but I was scared. She looked unhinged. "Liar," I mouthed, but no sound came out. She was turning her assault into self-defense. She was turning my question about theft into a robbery attempt. Then it was my father's turn. Richard Hartley walked to the stand like a man marching to his own funeral. He looked frail. When Dale asked him about the trust, about the $20 million, Richard looked at his hands. "My father, Arthur, was a great man," Richard said softly. But toward the end, his mind was going. He would promise things to people that he could not deliver. He told Lena about this trust, but he told me later that he had changed his mind. He realized Lena was not ready for that kind of responsibility. He wanted the money to stay in the company, to protect the family legacy. "And the signature?" Dale asked gently. "The one on the modification form?" Richard looked up, tears in his eyes. "Arthur asked me to handle it. His hands were shaking too much to sign. He gave me permission. He wanted it done. I was just following my father's wishes." It was the ultimate betrayal. My father was not just enabling the lie. He was claiming ownership of it to protect Victoria. He was painting Arthur as incompetent and himself as the dutiful son, erasing the forgery with a story of filial obedience. Ethan was the final knife in the back. He sat on the stand, looking like the victim of a terrible harassment campaign. "She threatened us," Ethan said, looking straight at me with cold eyes. "She told me that if we didn't give her $5 million, she would go to the press and say we stole from Grandpa. She said she would ruin the company. She didn't care about the truth. She just wanted a payout. That is why she is here. This is just a shakedown." To seal the narrative, Dale played a video clip. It was security footage from the lobby of Evercrest Private Banking, taken the day I went to confront the manager in Part 4. The video had no audio. It showed me slamming my hand on the desk. It showed me shouting. It showed me pointing a finger in the manager's face. Without the context, without knowing I was facing a man who was covering up a felony, I looked deranged. I looked violent. I looked exactly like the unstable woman they described. The jury watched the video, and I watched their faces harden. They saw a woman losing control. They did not see a woman fighting for justice. When Judge Harper finally called a recess for the day, I felt like I had been physically beaten. The court officers escorted us out a side door to avoid the press, but I could still hear the shouting from the street. I sat in the small witness preparation room, putting my head between my knees, trying to remember how to breathe. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. "They won," I whispered. "Talia, they won. The jury hates me. Did you see them? They think I am a monster who beats up old men and extorts her parents." Talia was pacing the room, but she stopped when I spoke. She pulled a chair over and sat directly in front of me. She grabbed my hands and pulled them away from my face. "Listen to me. Lena," she said. Her voice was not soft. It was iron. Today was their show. They had to throw everything they had. They used the character witnesses, the edited emails, the sob stories, because they know the facts are not on their side. "But the jury," I stammered. "The jury heard a story," Talia said. "A good story. But tomorrow? Tomorrow we show them the paper. We show them the forensic analysis of the ink. We show them the server logs that prove Richard was lying about Arthur asking him to sign. Arthur was in a coma when that login happened. Lena, Richard's sob story about helping his father falls apart the second we show the timestamp." She squeezed my hands hard enough to hurt. "They fired their shiny bullets," Talia said. "All flash, no substance. Tomorrow, we fire the truth. I do not need anyone to like you tonight. Lena, I do not need them to think you are sweet. I need them to look at the documents and realize they have been lied to." She stood up and gathered her files. "Go back to the safe house. Do not watch the news. Do not look at your phone. Read Arthur's letter again. Remember why you are here. You are not here to be popular. You are here to be right." That night, the safe house felt like a prison cell. The silence was heavy. I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. Every time I drifted off, I saw Henderson's lying face, heard Victoria's fake sobs, saw my father's averted eyes. I felt a profound, crushing loneliness. My entire family was on that stand, united against me. They had rewritten my entire life to fit their crime. Was I unstable? Was I greedy? Had I imagined the love Arthur had for me? I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. I reached into my bag and pulled out the copy of Arthur's letter, the one we had found in the safe behind the painting. "I am leaving you the $20 million not because I want to make you rich, but because I want to make you free. You are the only one in this bloodline who has ever had the courage to say no to me." I read the line over and over. The courage to say no. Arthur had not chosen me because I was perfect. He had not chosen me because I was sweet. He had chosen me because I was a fighter. He knew they would do this. He knew they would strip me bare and try to break me. "If Lena stands before any judge, tell them that this $20 million is hers." His voice from the recording played in my head. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The city lights of Denver twinkled in the distance. Somewhere out there, Victoria and Richard were probably toasting their performance with expensive champagne. They thought they had buried me today. They were wrong. I touched the bruise on my soul where their words had hit me. It hurt, yes, but it did not kill me. I realized then that I had been waiting for someone to save me. I had been waiting for Talia, for the judge, for the jury to validate me. But Arthur had not left the money to a victim. He left it to a survivor. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked pale. But my eyes were clear. "You are not the girl who got slapped in the kitchen anymore," I told my reflection. "You are the woman who opened the safe." I went back to the desk and sat down. I took out a notepad. I began to write down everything I wanted to say tomorrow. I would not let Dale interrupt me. I would not let Victoria's narrative stand. I would tell them about the blood in my mouth. I would tell them about the fear in Arthur's eyes. I would tell them about the $100,000, not as a demand, but as a theft. I would strip myself bare if I had to. I would let them see the ugly, raw, painful truth, because the truth was the only weapon I had left, and as Talia said, it was the only one that mattered. The sun began to rise over the Rockies, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry red. I watched it, feeling a cold resolve settle in my chest. Let them have their day. Let them have their lies. Tomorrow, I would burn their story to the ground, and I would use the paper trail they created as the kindling. I was ready to testify. Day 2 of the trial began not with a bang, but with the cold, unyielding silence of mathematics. Talia Monroe did not stand up and give a speech about morality. She did not plead for the jury's sympathy. Instead, she dimmed the lights in the courtroom and turned on a projector. On the large white screen, a timeline appeared. It was a simple graphic, a series of black lines and red arrows, but it told a story more damning than any witness could. "Ladies and gentlemen," Talia said, her laser pointer resting on the first date. "Yesterday, you heard stories about feelings. You heard about family dynamics and hurt pride. Today, we are going to talk about physics. Specifically, the physics of money. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It simply changes form. And $20 million does not simply vanish unless someone makes it disappear." She clicked a button. A red line shot across the screen from the Hartley Future Trust account at Evercrest to a holding account. Then, it split. One stream went to Vista Legacy Consulting. Another went to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. And finally, a small, pathetic tributary flowed directly into a private account named Apex Ventures, an LLC registered solely to Ethan Hartley. The jury stared at the screen. The complexity of the fraud was laid bare. It was not a mistake. It was a map of theft. Talia called Dr. Eris Thorne back to the stand. The forensic document examiner looked even more severe in the morning light. He set up his display, projecting the magnified images of the signatures. "This," Dr. Thorne said, pointing to the signature on the trust modification document, "is what we call a simulation. To the naked eye, it looks like Arthur Hartley's shaky hand. But when we overlay it with his actual signature from his hospital admission forms..." He clicked a button. The two signatures appeared on top of one another. They did not match. The pressure points were wrong. The angle of the pen was wrong. The person who signed the modification document was pressing down hard on the upstrokes. Dr. Thorne explained, "A person with right-side paralysis, like Arthur had after his stroke, drags the pen. They cannot apply force on the upstroke. Whoever wrote this had full motor control. They were faking the tremor." Gregory Dale, the family lawyer, stood up for cross-examination. He looked sweaty. He tried to argue about ink variance and paper quality, but Dr. Thorne shut him down with the impatience of a professor failing a student. "Mr. Dale," Thorne said, adjusting his glasses, "I am not guessing. Science does not guess. That signature is a forgery. Period." Next came Nolan Price. My former banker looked nervous as he took the oath, but when he looked at the defense table, his expression hardened. He told the jury about the morning Victoria and Dale came into the bank. "They told me to process the override," Nolan said, his voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "I told them the system flagged it. I told them the signature looked wrong. Mr. Dale told me that if I did not push the button, I would be fired for incompetence. He said the family would make sure I never worked in finance again.
And did you process it? Talia asked.
My boss did, Nolan said. I refused, and they fired me anyway. But before I left, I saved the logs. The jury was leaning forward now. The narrative of the crazy daughter was crumbling under the weight of technical reality. Then came Jenna Lewis. When she walked in, clutching her purse, Victoria let out a sharp, audible hiss of breath. Jenna took the stand and placed the small silver USB drive on the evidence table. Talia plugged it in. The courtroom went deadly silent. Arthur's voice filled the air. It was raspy, tired, but filled with the iron will I remembered. If anyone tries to say that I changed my mind, the recording played. Play this tape. I have not changed my mind. The fund is for Lena. Do not let them steal her future. I saw a juror in the front row wipe a tear from her eye. Another juror, a stern-looking man who had been skeptical yesterday, glared at Richard with open hostility. The prosecution calls Lena Hartley, Talia announced. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my head was clear. I walked to the witness stand and placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. Talia did not ask me about the trust immediately. She asked me about the kitchen. Lena, she said gently, tell us about the day you lost $100,000. I looked at the jury. I did not try to be tough. I did not try to be the hero the press wanted. I just told them the truth. I was 29 years old, I said, my voice steady. I was not a child throwing a tantrum. I was an adult woman who had worked for 5 years to save that money. When I asked where it went, I expected an explanation. Instead, I got a fist. I demonstrated the motion. She slapped me, then she punched me in the ribs, and while she was pinning me against the counter, she did not say, "Stop yelling." She said, "If you tell anyone, you will lose more than $100,000. Did you know what she meant at the time? Talia asked. No, I said. I thought she meant my job, but now I know. She meant the $20 million. The beating was not about the cash. It was about silence. It was about training me to be afraid so I would not look for the bigger theft. Gregory Dale stood up to object, claiming speculation, but Judge Harper overruled him. Your Honor, Talia said, turning to the bench, the prosecution would like to enter Exhibit G into evidence, a digital recording taken at the Hartley Mountain Lodge 2 weeks ago. Dale turned pale. He had fought to suppress this tape, but the judge had allowed it. The audio played. The quality was crystal clear. We took it out of the hands of a dying man. We wouldn't have needed to fix the signature if you had just been a good girl. Don't forget what I did to you over $100,000. You think I am afraid to leave a few more marks on you to protect $20 million? The sound of Victoria's voice, dripping with malice and arrogance, echoed off the mahogany walls. The jury looked from the speaker to the woman sitting at the defense table. Victoria was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of stone, but her hands were trembling uncontrollably. Dale tried to spin it. My client was provoked. She was speaking in anger. These are just words. Those are not just words, Talia said, cutting him off. That is a confession of forgery and a threat of violence. She then produced the final piece of the puzzle. The leather-bound notebook we had found in the wall safe. She projected a page onto the screen. It was Arthur's handwriting, dated a month before he died. Victoria was here today. She called Lena a nuisance that must be removed from the legacy. I am afraid she is going to try to take the trust. I have hidden the papers. I do not trust my own son anymore. The room felt suffocating. The weight of the evidence was crushing. Talia called Richard Hartley back to the stand. My father looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 days. He walked slowly, his shoulders hunched. Mr. Hartley, Talia said, holding up the photo of the painting with the red X. Did you know about the safe behind the landscape painting? Richard looked at the photo. He licked his dry lips. I knew there was a safe, yes. And did you know what was inside it? I thought it was just his personal diaries, Richard whispered. Mr. Hartley, Talia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "We have a recording of your wife admitting to fixing the signature. We have a recording of your father saying he was afraid of you. We have the server logs showing the transfer happened while your father was in a coma. Do you still maintain that Arthur Hartley asked you to sign that document?" Richard looked at the jury. He saw the disgust in their eyes. He looked at Ethan, who was burying his face in his hands. He looked at me. And then he broke. "She told me it was legal," Richard blurted out. His voice cracked. The courtroom gasped. "Who told you?" Talia pressed. Richard turned in his chair and pointed a shaking finger at Victoria. "Victoria," he said, his voice rising to a shout. "She told me the lawyers had cleared it. She told me Arthur had agreed verbally before the stroke. She said we just needed to sign the paperwork to make it official. She told me to sign it." "You liar!" Victoria screamed. She stood up at the defense table, knocking her chair over. Her composure shattered completely. "You spineless coward!" Victoria yelled, pointing back at him. "You knew! You wanted the money just as much as I did. If I hadn't done it, that old man would have given it all to her. To that ungrateful brat. She would have destroyed the company." The entire courtroom froze. The court reporter stopped typing. Victoria stood there, chest heaving, realizing what she had just said. If I hadn't done it? She had just confessed to the forgery, the motive, and the theft in open court, on the record, in front of a federal jury. Talia looked at the jury. She did not need to say a word. She simply looked back at Victoria and said, "No further questions." The closing arguments were a formality. Dale tried to talk about complex family dynamics, but he looked defeated. He knew it was over. Talia stood up for her summation. She walked over to the jury box and looked them in the eye. "This is not a complicated case," Talia said softly. "They want you to think it is. They want you to think it is about corporate structures and tax laws. It is not. This is a story about a woman named Lena Hartley. She worked hard. She saved $100,000, and when she asked where it went, her family beat her, and when she kept asking, she found out that the $100,000 was just the down payment on a $20 million crime." She pointed at me. "They thought they could erase her. They thought they could erase Arthur's wishes, but they forgot one thing. The truth leaves a trail, and today, that trail ends here." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He did not look at the defendants. "In the matter of the United States versus Victoria Hartley, on the charge of wire fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty," the foreman said. "On the charge of bank fraud?" "Guilty." "On the charge of aggravated identity theft?" "Guilty." "On the charge of witness tampering?" "Guilty." It went on and on. Richard was found guilty of conspiracy and aiding and abetting. Ethan was found guilty of receipt of stolen property and conspiracy. Judge Harper looked down from the bench. Her face was stern. "The defendants will be remanded into custody pending a sentencing hearing," she ordered. "Furthermore, this court orders the immediate restitution of the Hartley Future Trust. The assets currently held by Vista Legacy Consulting and its subsidiaries are frozen and will be transferred to the rightful beneficiary, Lena Hartley, effective immediately." The gavel banged. It was a sharp, final sound that echoed the crack of the safe opening. Federal marshals moved in. They handcuffed Victoria first. She did not scream. She did not cry. She looked at me with dead eyes as they led her away. Richard was weeping softly. Ethan looked like he was in shock, staring at the ceiling as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. I did not cheer. I did not smile. I just sat there and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. The room began to clear. Reporters were shouting questions, but I did not hear them. I turned to the empty chair next to me in the gallery. I imagined Arthur sitting there, wearing his old cardigan, nodding his approval. "The hitting stops here, Grandpa," I whispered. "The $100,000, the $20 million, it is over. No one gets silenced anymore." I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding Denver sunlight. The press was waiting. A sea of microphones was thrust into my face. Lena, how do you feel? Lena, what will you do with the money? Lena, do you have anything to say to your stepmother? I stopped. I looked directly into the nearest camera lens. I thought about the woman watching this at home who might be afraid to ask her husband about a missing withdrawal. I thought about the son scared to ask his parents about his inheritance. If your family, your bank, or anyone else tells you that you are crazy when you ask about your own money, I said, my voice ringing clear over the noise of the crowd. Ask again. Ask louder. Because it is very possible that behind the $100,000, there is a number much, much bigger. I turned and walked away. I did not look back at the courthouse. I did not look back at the family that had tried to destroy me. I walked toward my car, toward my future, and toward a life that was finally, completely my own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on the verdict. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people who might need to hear it.